By, it was the 2nd of June 1802, there's an announcement made that Pemulwuy had been killed. There is some evidence to suggest that it may have been Henry Hacking, after whom Port Hacking is named. It's not clear, but it seems likely that it was certainly 2 European settlers, 2 Europeans, and it's likely that Henry Hacking was at least one of them.
The manifold packages you have had the goodness to forward to me have always, owing to your friendly care in addressing and invoicing them, come safe and in good condition to my hands. Among the last was the head of one of your subjects, which is said to have caused some comical consequences when opened at the Customs House, but when brought home was very acceptable to our anthropological collectors and makes a figure in the museum of the late Mr. Hunter, now purchased by the public, Sir Joseph Banks.
So his head was removed. We know it was preserved in spirits, and it was sent back to England on the ship the Speedy.
They shipped it off to England, to Sir Joseph Banks, who'd been knighted by this stage, and Sir Joseph Banks presented it to King George III. When the head rolled round, it sent him over the edge. He went into quite a state after that and never recovered.
It was also common to remove heads. I mean, from 1791, we know that Aboriginal heads were removed and preserved and sent back to England.
I'm not sure where that head is. It's interesting because I've come across a few little clues here and there. My thoughts are that his head might actually be in Ireland, in Dublin.
Now, they claim that head was placed in an Irish museum. The more we dug, the more our people wanted to know where it was. They claimed it was put in a German museum. They've made a lot of claims about the remains. And today they're claiming that they were bombed during World War II.
It was believed to be in the Hunterian Museum in London, although they claim that they don't have it. Nobody seems to know exactly where it is, or nobody claims ownership of it at the present time. There are investigations still going on to see if it can be located.
Some of our people believe that if you're not buried intact, that you're doomed to wander this earth, you know, you're a restless soul. And as long as Pemulwuy's head is still in England, then his soul is, you know, never going to be rested.
If it happens and it's returned, we need to all congregate and spend that time for the weekend saying our prayers, crying for him and realising that he's home.
There are many Aboriginal people whose remains are in various museums in the United Kingdom, in other places in Europe, certainly in Russia, in the United States. And some of these remains are coming back. So there are examples where museums are now recognising the fact that Aboriginal people do have rights of ownership over their ancestors. However, we also know that many museums are very reluctant to give up what they consider to be specimens, things that were donated to them. So there's a lot of difficulty in obtaining some of these remains. It's not an easy matter.
If our government's not going to listen and make it happen, we need to take it to a level where it'll get more exposure. The week before Australia Day, we were talking to the future King of England. A couple of things came from that. The idea of trying to get this document which asks for the return of Pemulwuy. Like Pemulwuy's repatriation. He should be buried in country and respected as the great warrior that he was.
I'm not sure if Prince William has any clue about what's going on with that stuff, but perhaps he can take it back as a messenger.
He might just go home and do some research and realise that his grandfathers and great-great-grandmother have been mucking up a bit, you know, so if he takes any notice of it, that's more righteousness for the kid.
I guess Pemulwuy now is he's seen as a figure of courage and resilience. You know, being able to keep going and fight back, and regardless of how big that enemy might appear, it's you know, you keep on and you keep standing up for what you know is right and what is yours. And I think as Indigenous people, we need those role models.
It epitomises struggle, it epitomises resistance, but in a lot of ways it epitomises pride and identity. We know there's been problems in the past, but if we consistently told our kids about those problems, they'll always see that, and their thoughts will be top-heavy of the problems and not who they can be. So we tell them everything about the good things, about Pemulwuy, even about Bennelong, who did do well. He went down in history as some sort of sellout. He wasn't. Colaby, Arabanu, all these fellas were part of our area, and that dual history, we show people that. It'll only teach people about Aboriginal people. It'll break down perceptions.
I know as a primary teacher, when I'm talking about Pemulwuy now, there are kids who do know of him because it's starting to be, you know, encouraged into the education system now. We're starting to learn more about Indigenous people and figures that were part of the making of this country. So, yeah, I think it's an important thing that we hold those people up and put them on the same level as Ned Kelly or, you know, the other classic iconic figures of Australian history.
Ned Kelly is so easily accessible. Inside, I think, just about every white Australian, there dwells an Irishman. And that Irishman isn't necessarily Ned Kelly, but looks like him, feels like him, thinks like him, and in some cases does like him. Now, Pemulwuy is quite different. Pemulwuy is not inside everyone. Pemulwuy belongs to some few people, but not to everyone. So what the others can do is respect it. It's the history of the place that's come to be the place where they live and where many of them will die.
I think they all resonate with Ned Kelly because it's still connected to the colonial history. And he's got his promotion of who he was, who Ned Kelly was, promotion or exposure was outweighed Pemulwuy.
Most white Australians would still not consider Pemulwuy to be a hero because he resisted European settlement of Australia. That's not necessarily racism, it's simply the reality that they're now in the majority, and so they see themselves as being the people who are looking after the Australian continent. Aboriginal people, on the other hand, have an entirely different point of view. He was a man who was defending his country. He was trying to stop the British from spreading settlement into other areas.
The fact that he was, you know, the first patriot of this country and he's unrecognised. It's the first patriot that died fighting for his land, culture and country, you know? And there's no recognition. Up until now, he was written out of history.
Written out carefully. Now, when that book was published, it dropped into an empty valley. There was nobody. You know, why wasn't I attacked by all sorts of academics of the descendants of the Rum Corps? Because they didn't know about it. They were more efficient than they knew what was good for them. And they had removed one piece of history, but didn't really write another convincing one.
That's the biggest blow that you could ever deal to an enemy, is write them out of history, is to get rid of, you know, all recognition that they ever existed.
The question of how we can better recognise people like Pemulwuy is a difficult one because Australians generally will hold a few things dear to them and ignore most of history. If you asked people who the first Australian Prime Minister was, most Australians would not know. If you asked them who the Prime Minister was 20 years ago, 30 years ago, many Australians would not know. So history is relative. It's a story which is told by the victors. It's a story which is, in the case of Australian history, almost always told by white historians.
There are still some people in this country who have a vested interest in the country's history remaining as it is. That is a place where British came to, found the company empty, took that over. There were a few blacks running around, but they died of disease and that was the end of it. There's still some people in Australia who would like that to be the way it is, or was. although it never was.
History is open to interpretation. Many historians in the 1970s, 1980s and 90s looked at primary sources of information and came up with estimates of how many Aboriginal people had been killed, had been massacred, had been poisoned. If we talk about a population in Australia of 1 to 2 million Aboriginal people in 1788, and we know that that was perhaps less than 40,000 by 1900, then we're looking at a massive depopulation. And so there's a responsibility on the point of historians to document that. On the other hand, there are those historians who argue that those figures can't be justified. And so they maintain that Aboriginal people succumbed to European settlement.
Like just having those terms, you know, the black armband view of history or whatever, like, why isn't it just history?
Why do we need to have two different interpretations of history? Well, it's because people should look at the documentation and draw their own conclusions. My conclusion is that there were large numbers of Aboriginal people in Australia at the time of contact. From the 1790s, and probably earlier than that, they were resisting European settlement, and they continued to do so virtually right up to the present day.
Think of it this way. Imagine had the book not been written. Imagine if it had not been written. What would people think happened? What on earth would people think when they landed on that airport at Kamei? Would have they really thought this was an empty land? That somebody just wandered up the beach and, like Robinson Crusoe, and built a hut on the shore? What would have they thought if it wasn't for the existence of that story?
When the proper history is presented and when the proper facts are presented, then people have, you know, they have no choice but to go with the truth. So I suppose that's what I'm all about, is changing those perceptions and even changing my own people's perceptions. You know, some of my own classmates in high school, they'd never even would comprehend certain things that, you know, Pemulwuy achieved and Windradine achieved, and how that sets up, you know, the fight that we've got to continue now.
You know, I've found, even with myself, that the more I learn and the more I talk about what I've learned, it makes it so much more easy to remember, and I can pass what's right to my own children. That's how simple we want it to be, people to learn about it so they can share it with their children, and then children can grow up with this pride of who their people were and who they are. And that means, it's so simple, but it means everything to us.
I know that most of his descendants are quite happy that place names are being given which come from traditional culture, which come from Aboriginal people or from Aboriginal place names. I know that most people are happy with that. Whether Pemulwuy would have been happy with that, I can't say.
It's a bit of a contradiction, you know what I mean? Like, to name a suburb after him full of people who he fought to keep out, you know.
I love the fact that our names are remembered for places. And I know there's a few places that still have Aboriginal names, you know. If you're looking down south, Wollongong, and if you're looking at Cronulla, Kurrannula.
Parramatta is the place where the Parramatta clan were. Mulgoa is the place where the Black Swan people were, the Mulgoa people. We know the term Cabramatta is where the Cabra Grubs or Cobra Grubs were. It's the creek where the Cobra Grubs were. So right across Sydney, we already use traditional Aboriginal names for places. And what we're doing now is identifying some of the people who were from those areas who are also giving their name to those local places.
I just thought Pemulwuy fought for 13 or 14, 15 years resisting settlement of this country, and here we are naming a suburb after him. I just found it just incomprehensible. Why would you do that?
But it's fantastic to have it in other places. People ask, who the hell is Pemulwuy?
What about a statue, you know, or something like that, like, or even a museum, you know, dedicated to our past heroes? You know, but that'll never happen in our country, because then that means that our heroes are immortalised, and they try to write them out of history in the first place.
I think it's amazing that they're naming a suburb after him, but still they'll be printing it in their own fashion, you know. His real name, Bembelwayan, you know. So we're going to have to put up with Pemulwuy, but then again, a lot of the non-Indigenous constituency know nothing about him, you know, and I think the people of Holroyd should be full of pride for that name that's coming to their district. It was his hunting ground, man. He lived all through there, brother, you know. Diamond, where are you? Diamond, where are you? Like all that you know.
Well, I hope you've enjoyed this series on Pemulwuy, A War of Two Laws. It's no surprise that Indigenous leaders in Sydney want to find his remains and return them to country, and none other than Prince William has offered to help. Already the story of Pemulwuy is being included in history curricula, and as you saw in the film, suburbs are being named in Pemulwuy's honour. If you missed part 1 last week or would like to view the series again, then please visit our website at abc.net.au/messagestick. See you next week.